provincial areas just aren't there now.
Or even on Lambton Quay.
Maybe they should be converting commercial properties to residential apartment buildings.
Anyway, he says own a house, keep improving it, sell it when you get older and need to downsize, and that's it really, and then sell up and go to live in Nelson. Grant Cleary has been on with us before. He's a financial specialist and an economic commentator from Cleary Wealth Management. We thought we'd get another point of view on this. Grant, good afternoon.
Good morning.
You've been working hard. What parts of what Bob Jones says do you agree with, Grant?
I think primarily what he's saying is caveat emptor, and that you shouldn't get hoodwinked by promises you don't understand or that aren't survivable long term. I think the points that you made before about, he said, don't try and become a financial expert. I think that's right. I think you look at people that have been wrecked by investing outside their sphere of expertise by doing things like the apartments off the plan or investing in the finance companies. And people really don't have any idea about the most basic of financial truisms, which is you need to be diversified. But being diversified isn't owning 10 different finance companies, because you're essentially owning the same thing 10 times. You've actually got to diversify your risk away.
He says to avoid, like the plague, commercial property in our provincial cities. It shows a dangerous ignorance of demographic trends. Do you agree with him about that?
Yeah, I do. I think what you've got in the provinces is, as he says in the article, there's not really much happening out there. So you're basically investing in a very tiny little market. I think he also points out that he's been the victim of the change in the world, that he has had collapses of Australian retailers in places that he owns in Queen Street and Lambton Quay. So I think that you really want to be investing in the disruptors rather than the casualties. And until the casualties are on life support, and then you buy them. Yeah. The irony is that that's how Bob does his stuff. He buys distressed assets of all hues. It's a very sensible thing to do. Your downside's limited while your upside is huge.
Of course, most of us can't do that, Grant, can we? That's the thing. You know, we lack the savvy and the nous and the wherewithal. If you don't want to keep improving your home, maybe you don't own a home and rely on that, or maybe your home doesn't have that great a location. What is the alternative as you look towards your own retirement, do you think?
I think, firstly, you've got to understand what retirement is. The whole thing with 65 as a marker of retirement came from Bismarck back in the 1800s. He developed the first ever superannuation scheme in the world. It's so good that we all use it today. And he chose 65 as a marker of old age. The life expectancy in Europe at the time was 37. That means we should retire now at 140, which is a little tricky. So people have got to work out what retirement is first. And then when it comes to things like doesn't have such a great location, apparently the key to real estate is location, location, location. Yet Bob himself knows he's made a ton of money buying provincial properties cheap, remedying them and then selling them at a profit. In other words, he's both bought with limited downside, he's been dynamic, and he's made money by selling at a high and moving on.
All right. That's all we've got time for, but thank you, Grant. Always a pleasure. James Elliott, nice to see you, James. Come back again. And Linda, good luck with the drive home, too.
Thank you.
Linda, Helen and James Elliott on the panel. And Checkpoint with John Campbell coming right up.
Kia ora everyone. Tonight, residents along Christchurch's Heathcote River are on high alert as high tide approaches. We will go there live. Residents of the Otago town of Henley begin the clean-up after the flooding there. The British Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson visits Kaikoura. The father of a 9-year-old girl who drowned in a bathtub yesterday morning thanks the community for its support. An American doctor fears he'll be kicked out of the country because he's 67 despite a chronic GP shortage in rural New Zealand. Te Puia Marae is full less than a week after reopening its doors, and US authorities vow to crack down on people smuggling after 8 people were found dead in a truck parked at a Walmart. All in that and more coming up after the news.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora, good afternoon, ko Katrina Batanaho. People along Christchurch's Heathcote River are being warned of possible further flooding at high tide shortly. River water contaminated with raw sewage flooded garages and sleepouts and was within millimetres of entering homes at the weekend. Conan Young reports.
Those living along the river have been cleaning up today, sweeping mud from footpaths and drying out furniture and carpets. Water lapped at wooden bearers underneath homes and a bad smell fills many of them. A state of emergency called at the weekend to help authorities deal with the floods remains in place until tomorrow morning, in case this evening's high tide causes further problems. In Otago, ko Conan Young tēnei.
And the authorities in Christchurch say 30 properties have been flooded above floor level. The Canterbury Medical Officer of Health is advising anyone living in the homes to leave as soon as possible and to stay away. Another 27 are affected with flooding above foundation level. Civil Defence response teams made up of building inspectors, engineers and welfare officers have today been going door to door to talk to people living in badly flood-affected properties to assess their needs and tell them about health and safety risks. The Dunedin City Council has started tallying up how many properties were damaged in the weekend's rainstorm. About 130 homes remain evacuated around wider Dunedin, mostly in the Henley and Taieri areas. A state of emergency for Otago was lifted this morning as flooding subsided. The council's flood recovery manager, Simon Pickford, says it started contacting people to find out the full impact.
Starting with a phone call, just to check in on people to see how they're going and to get some idea of whether their property was flooded, damaged in any way. And if we need to if we can't get hold of people, we'll do a door knock. And so we've got a contingency around that probably tomorrow.
Simon Pickford says 4 homes have so far been given dangerous building notices. Fruit and vegetable growers are pleased the government is willing to back off taking a tougher line on immigrant workers. The changes include a minimum median annual income of $48,000 for jobs currently considered skilled, and forcing migrants to leave for at least 12 months after 3 years of working in this country. But after complaints from some industries and regions, the government will take another look. Mike Chapman from Horticulture New Zealand welcomes the review, saying it would have made it harder for the industry to secure long-term workers. He says the system needs more flexibility.
And allows consideration on a case-by-case and a province-by-province basis is a very good idea, because if there is low unemployment in the area and you can't find Kiwis, that's an area that needs assistance.
Mike Chapman. An American doctor fears immigration red tape may force him to be kicked out of the country despite the desperate need for GPs in rural areas. Dr. Mitch Feller has worked in Taranaki for 3.5 years and made a mistake on his residency application, meaning he needed to renew his work permit. The 67-year-old says he's been met with requests for a barrage of new health tests which he may not be able to meet in time. He says Immigration New Zealand has been inflexible and adversarial and has showed a lack of understanding for the shortage of GPs in Taranaki. The agency says GPs are on its skill shortage list, but applicants have to meet the required criteria. Auckland principals say managers are working as classroom teachers at some schools because of a shortage of teachers. Their association says some schools have given up advertising vacancies because of a lack of responses, and they're worried about finding enough teachers for next year. A survey by a teacher union indicates many young teachers are thinking of leaving Auckland because house prices and rents are too high. The Education Ministry says the rate of teacher retention in the city is high at more than 92%. A paraglider who was seriously injured after crashing on a beach south of Auckland managed to scale a cliff and fly back to get help. A man in his 30s fell from a height of 10 metres while flying along the Karioitahi beach west of Waiuku. The Westpac rescue helicopter says the man crashed in an isolated spot, so he scaled a cliff and flew 10 kilometres back down the beach to a local business, which then called for help. The man was flown to Auckland City Hospital with serious injuries. It's 5:04. To sport, conditions for Saturday's Super Rugby quarter-final did nothing to showcase the game, but Highlanders Chief Executive Roger Clark has stopped short of saying the game should have been postponed. The Crusaders beat the Highlanders in a waterlogged match at AMI Stadium to advance to the semi-finals this weekend, where they'll play the Chiefs. A commentator, the former All Black and Highlanders player Jeff Wilson, has said the game should have been delayed a day. Roger Clark has lamented Christchurch's lack of a covered stadium, as in Dunedin, saying it denied the players the opportunity to showcase their skills.
You get a game like the weekend and it, sort of harks back to the 70s and 80s where, we're playing in the mud, and that's not, it's not the way New Zealand rugby's evolved. In saying that, when you play games in July in the South Island, it's more than likely it's going to be wet.
Highlanders Chief Executive Roger Clark. Meanwhile, Carmichael Hunt has been ruled out of the Wallabies opening Bledisloe Cup tests against the All Blacks after undergoing ankle surgery. Hunt is expected to be out for 2 months, which means he'll miss Australia's first 4 Rugby Championship clashes, including the first 2 Bledisloe Cup encounters in Sydney and Dunedin next month. New Zealand has finished with 5 medals at the World Para-Athletic Championships in London, with the latest medals coming in the men's T36 800-metre final. William Steadman won silver and Keegan Pitcher bronze in the event. That's the news.
Floods in Dunedin.
I'm just absolutely stuffed because I've spent 3 hours taking 2 buckets continuously up and down the track.
Tragedy in Texas.
The police had told us they had 8 bodies found inside the back of this tractor trailer. They are all believed to be undocumented immigrants who were being brought into the United States by smugglers.
And memories of a princess.
One of her mottos to me was, you can be as naughty as you want, just don't get caught.
Morning Report with Susie Ferguson and Guy Aspinall, weekdays from 6.
Then on 9 to noon, Spicy's gone, now we've got the mooch, the changing of the guard in President Trump's comms team. And after 10, the scourge of modern slavery and what New Zealand can do to combat it. Our guest is Andrew Wallace, the head of a charity which fights slavery in the UK. Join me, Catherine Ryan, on 9 to noon after Morning Report on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihepe. A few showers becoming frequent for a time overnight and tomorrow morning with isolated thunderstorms. Bay of Plenty, cloudy periods, showers tomorrow with possible thunderstorms clearing in the afternoon. Gisborne to Wairarapa, mainly fine, isolated showers tomorrow. Whanganui to Kapiti coast. A few showers turning to rain this evening, clearing and becoming fine tomorrow morning. Wellington, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, areas of cloud and isolated showers clearing tomorrow morning. Nelson, showers clearing and becoming fine this evening. Bulla and Westland, showers easing this evening. Southland, a few showers clearing this evening but returning tomorrow morning. Fiordland, a few showers turning to rain tonight. And the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, drizzle at times tomorrow. It's exactly 5:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint. Because John Campbell's back.
Thanks so much, Katrina Batten. Evening, everyone. Coming up on the program, Boris Johnson and Kaikoura. Te Puia Marae opened its doors last week and is already full. In Texas, the desperate search for a better life leads to death in the back of a truck. And President Trump's new communications director has some very clear messages indeed. But we go first to Christchurch, where a state of emergency still exists. A civil defence update at 4 p.m. listed 30 properties as having been flooded above floor level, with a further 27 having been affected with flooding above foundation level. A large number of properties have had raw sewage wash over them as drainage systems simply couldn't cope with the volume of water. While the situation is easing, high tide is right about now, and over the next hour or so that may push more water out of the Heathcote River into the areas most severely flooded over the weekend. Our reporter Conan Young joins us now live from beside the river. Hi Conan.
Hi, John. Hey, listen, high tide is right now, actually 5:08 p.m. I'm looking at the river now. It's about where you'd probably expect to see it at this time, if there hadn't been floods. However, authorities are saying it won't be until 6:30 tonight that they'll actually know whether or not this river is going to cause more problems for people along the street. This is Clarendon Terrace, where I visited earlier today, and spoke to a number of residents here who were badly flooded, sleepouts and whatnot, garages, etc., all flooded. They told me they were less than impressed with what the council had been doing to try and prevent this flood from happening. John Woodward didn't have time to remove his things from his garage before close to a metre of water entered it on Friday night, submersing everything inside.
We haven't been here that long, and most of it, what we have is stored.
You hadn't unpacked yet?
Well, we've got nowhere to put anything. This is an older house with not much storage. A lot of it is stuff like the kids' toys when they were little, and books, and it's all been underwater. You're going to take it to the dump.
Because this area is a known flood risk, John Woodward's insurer requires him to pay a $2,000 excess before it will contribute towards replacing any damaged goods.
If it's going to cost me less than $2,000 to fix it up myself, I'm not going to claim.
So that's $2,000 that has to come out of your pocket potentially.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But if I made the claim, that would be the case as well.
And so, given that obviously this is a known area, isn't it? With the insurers are certainly aware of it. What's your take on how the council has done at preventing this?
Well, the council they can't be blamed for making the wrong decision if they don't make a decision.
Bruce Kane is also unhappy with the council around what he says is its lack of action on preventing flooding in the area.
So, we've got to wait to get that drained out now.
And so it's made the bearers quite damp.
Well, the bearers damp. I mean, they'll dry out because there's natural draft that goes under the house, but there's actual water there's polythene on the ground, and there's water on top of that. So, we've got to wait. You can't. It's only probably an inch or so deep now, but you can't pump it out because you ain't get a pump that'll pump out that. The only way you can do it is take the polythene out and let it naturally drain out and then redo it again.
There's a definite smell, isn't there?
You can smell it, yeah. Well, I mean, of course, it's all contaminated. That's the problem, It's all contaminated. I mean, look at all that stuff there. Yeah, it's everywhere. Still, that's what we're given, and I can assure you I'm not very happy. I'm doing very hard here not to swear at you. I can assure you, because I'm usually pretty good at that. But no, that's the way it is, I'm afraid.
The last time Christchurch had flooding like this 3 years ago, the water made it all the way into Bruce Kane's home. This time it came as high as his outdoor table, flooding his sleep out and garage, but stopping short of coming indoors. However, the home's bearers got wet, and the rotten smell that hangs in the air outside has also made it indoors.
I think it's come out from Germany, sitting up here. So, I mean, what do you do?
Since the floods of 2014, the Christchurch City Council has spent $25 million on flood protection works in and around the Heathcote River. It plans to spend a further $52 million before next winter. However, its drainage manager, Keith Davidson, says even after all of this work, there are no guarantees residents won't be flooded again.
There's always a bigger storm that could come. There's always a bigger tidal surge. So what we have to do is we have to try and predict for, the events that would happen in a sort of generational event. And that's what we're working very, very hard to achieve. So we can't give guarantees, but what we have seen is that, particularly since 2014, we have done a lot of work which has reduced flood risk.
The council will make a call tomorrow morning on whether to lift its state of emergency that has been in place since the weekend to help it deal with the floods. In Ōpawa for Checkpoint, ko Conan Young tēnei.
As Conan said, it's high tide now, but it may take an hour or so if the river is going to be affected by high tide for the levels to really rise. We'll check back with Civil Defence after 6 o'clock tonight to see what's happening with the Heathcote. Meanwhile, some Dunedin residents have spent the day cleaning up while others are still waiting for floodwaters, heavy floodwaters there to subside. The weekend deluge dumped more rain in a day than the average for the entire month in some areas, with some towns having a state of emergency declared. That was lifted throughout Otago today. About 220 households were evacuated across the region, with the council saying it could be days until some can go back. Our reporter Tom Furley and visual journalist Claire Easton Farrelly went to take a look.
Settlement of Henley bore the worst of the weekend's rain, with 35 households evacuated. Slips and slowly subsiding floodwaters still make reaching it difficult. Travis Stewart, his wife and 3 young children live on the banks of the Taieri River and have spent a busy day cleaning up again.
We've had about 6 floods here since we've been here. We've been here about 5 years. This is the highest it's ever been since we've been here.
Although Civil Defence came round on Friday night, they decided to stay put, knowing their house had been built higher than the flood banks.
Now the clean-up begins as the water recedes, so we'll just scrape off the worst of it and then hose it all off, and as the water recedes there'll just be more to do. We'll just be moving chickens back once we clean the chicken coop and move a bit of mud around the driveway, but we're pretty lucky compared to a few people down the road further.
Emma McGregor, her husband and 2 kids, only moved into their place a year ago.
Yeah, we knew it was a flood zone.
Right.
We didn't realise it was like this.
Are you surprised? How do you feel about the amount of water that's come through?
Wee bit overwhelmed, but yeah.
Yeah. While they were able to move some of their vehicles up onto higher ground, a car remains underwater on their backyard and a new motorbike is submerged in the garage.
We got the boat from the front of our house to our friends who had brought their boat down to the riverbank there and grabbed our dogs and headed down to their house.
So you had a little boat handy. Why is that? Just what would you normally use the boat for?
Duck shooting. Yeah, we had the boat handy. We had it tied up to the deck just in case we had to get out in a hurry.
They're off to live with their grandparents for a while and, along with many others, won't be able to return to live until things have dried out and silt and mud has been cleaned away. Liz McIntyre and Bronwyn Henry usually have a view overlooking green fields.
Saturday morning, woke up, came down to make coffee, opened the door to let the dogs out, and we had a lake right up to it was unreal. So, of course, naturally I had to go and wake her up to say, you've got to come and see this. Henley, the Taieri plains just disappeared.
Power was turned off in Henley for safety, although it has been restored to most with the help of emergency generators. For Liz McIntyre and Bronwyn Henry, spirits are high. Living off the grid, they could offer us a cup of tea.
We're very lucky. People laughed at us when we bought this place, but being good Go Guides, we're cosy as.
The Dunedin City Council is encouraging people to avoid going back to Henley because of the health risk as floodwaters subside. It says it could be a number of days until people can return. From Dunedin for Checkpoint, Tom Furley.
5:17 on Checkpoint. An American doctor fears immigration red tape may force him to be kicked out of the country despite the desperate need for GPs in rural New Zealand. Mitch Feller has worked in Taranaki for 3.5 years and has been battling immigration over his status in New Zealand for more than 6 months. This comes as patients in Patea, just 20 minutes up the road, resort to using a pop-up virtual medical service because there's no permanent doctor. Our Taranaki reporter Robin Martin has more.
In October last year, Dr. Feller applied for residency under the Essential Skills category, but discovered he'd made a mistake and needed to apply in the Skilled Migrant category. There was a catch, however. The cut-off was 65, and he's 67 years old, and would need a waiver from the Associate Minister of Immigration. In the meantime, he needed to renew his work permit, and says he was met with a request for a barrage of new health tests.
I've been working here as a full-time GP for 3 years. I haven't caused any trouble. I'm up to date with all my continuing education. I have my practicing certificate renewed every year, and I couldn't understand why all of a sudden all these extra tests were necessary.
Dr. Feller says Immigration New Zealand is inflexible and adversarial and has shown a lack of understanding for the shortage of GPs in Taranaki. The South Georgian native fears he won't be able to get all the tests he needs done in time, but insists he's still fit and ready to serve the Hawara community that needs him.
I couldn't if I wanted to. I've sold everything in the States to get the money to come here. My wife and I both came here with 2 suitcases apiece. We sold our home, we sold 2 cars, all of our furniture, most of my clothing. The only items I saved were my vinyl record albums and my books. So I came to stay.
South Taranaki has a chronic shortage of GPs. Patea has not had one for several weeks, prompting the launch today of an online consultation service offered by Ngāti Ruanui in conjunction with the high-profile doctor Lance O'Sullivan. Dr Marlene Bezutenhout, who owns Mountain View Medical where Dr Feller works, says the situation is critical.
Recruitment to Taranaki and specifically South Taranaki has been a long-term problem. And then after you've recruited someone, retaining someone is very difficult. People tend to go to the bigger cities. For any practice at this stage, it would be devastating if they lost a GP.
Dr Bezutenhout says if Dr Feller was forced out of practice, it would be a huge loss.
Mitch is heading for being 3 years in New Zealand, but every doctor is, like I said, precious to the practice. Losing any doctor would mean there's a significant higher load on the other doctors, and they just can't make it. Patient demand is just so high that we cannot lose anybody.
Quietly waiting for his appointment, George Wright says he'd be horrified if Dr Feller had to leave the country.
Well, we're short of doctors anyway, so even if he's an ordinary doctor, I've had to wait three weeks for this appointment. So even if he's just an ordinary doctor, it would be disadvantaged. But the fact that he's an excellent doctor makes it worse.
Mr Wright says the shortage of rural GPs is unacceptable.
It's terrible. Yeah, it's a bad state. And I don't want a virtual doctor. I want a real one.
What do you think the government should do about that, or the DHB?
Follow up the idea of starting a third medical school at Waikato. And also Winston Peters' idea of paying the fees of medical students to work in rural areas.
The MP for Whanganui, Chester Borrows, says he is aware of Dr Feller's case and is working with him to resolve his problems with immigration. Immigration New Zealand says it couldn't discuss Dr Feller's case without a privacy waiver. It says GPs are included on its long-term skill shortage list, but as with any applications for residency or work visas, applicants are required to meet the relevant immigration criteria. In Hawera, for Checkpoint, ko Robin Martin Tēnei.
And we'll have more on the government and immigration policies later in the program. The British Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, has thanked the people of Kaikoura for helping Britons trapped there after last year's earthquake, undertaking his first official trip to New Zealand. Boris Johnson will meet with the Prime Minister, Bill English and senior ministers during his visit, with trade expected to be in the spotlight as the UK negotiates its exit from the European Union, of course. First up today, he travelled to Kaikoura with the Civil Defence Minister Nathan Guy, where he was welcomed onto Takahanga Marae.
Incredible for us all to be here with you today. This is my first time in New Zealand, and of course I'm discovering that there are some things that we have in common with this wonderful place and with Marae. Of course, a tradition of strong female leadership, which we have here. But there are many things that are different, and I'm learning. Thank you for teaching me the hongi. Which I think is a beautiful form of introduction, though it might be misinterpreted in a pub in Glasgow if you were to try it. I also have to say that this is the most mind-blowingly, mind-numbingly beautiful country that I've ever seen.
Boris Johnson thanked the people of Kaikoura for looking after the 200 UK tourists who were caught up in the town after last November's magnitude 7.8 earthquake.
Thank you again from the bottom of my heart for your kindness and the way you reached out to them and the way you looked after them. And as I've said already, I know that they slightly overstayed their welcome as far as you obviously know how to lay on a good meal. And I'm told they ate you out of house and home. They ate all the crayfish and really didn't want to go. So many, many thanks.
Mr Johnson walked around the town giving his support to the recovery efforts of business and tourism operators in the town. We'll talk to one of them later in the program. This afternoon he went to Pukeahu National War Memorial Park in Wellington and laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown warrior. He was then going to have a media conference, we understand, or a stand-up or something. Our political editor, Jane Patterson, joins us now live on the phone. Jane, a bit of confusion over this. The media conference that isn't, I understand.
That's right, John. A bit of a schmozzle, to be honest. With these events from visiting politicians and dignitaries, there's a very scheduled program and media have to register days in advance to attend. And the one that we were going to was going to be a reception attended by local RSA and military officers and that sort of thing. When we got there, the reception was already underway. We weren't allowed into that, but there was going to be a promise of a stand-up. So basically a sort of informal media conference where he would take questions from reporters. But unfortunately, that we were told that that was not going to happen. The liaison came out and said that Boris Johnson's press officer had canned that opportunity, and almost with an inference that had so many media opportunities and photos today that it might not go down that well back home to be so accessible to the media. So we're on our way back to Parliament.
Yes, that's all a little bizarre, isn't it? Can we talk about the significance of this visit? Obviously, Brexit is taking place, although, by golly, that is a prolonged process. And the opportunity for New Zealand to renegotiate terms of trade with Britain once it leaves Europe looms. But is that really meaningfully taking place? How big is this visit, Jane?
Look, I think there's definitely a sense of hurry up and wait almost. New Zealand very aware of the time and the long drawn-out negotiations and just the timetable for when the UK will actually separate off from the European Union. But Bill English saying today that there are two main issues that they really want to talk to Mr Johnson about. One is making sure that once the UK is no longer part of the EU, that New Zealanders' rights of access and citizenship are going to be protected. And of course the other one is trade. So New Zealand has sent negotiators over to the UK saying that we have a lot of experience and we were going to be a helping hand as they look to start negotiating their own trade deals. So New Zealand very much looking to get in early and to start looking at a bilateral direct trade deal with the UK.
Jane Patterson, our political editor, joining us live. Thanks, Jane. Jane was about to attend a Boris Johnson media stand-up, but it looks like it was cancelled because he didn't want to give access to the New Zealand media that might make the British media back home bewildered and envious. It's 27 minutes past 5. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. The father of a young Auckland girl who drowned in a bath has thanked the community and the wider Brethren Church for their support. Patrick Whiteman told me his family is heartbroken, obviously, after his youngest child, 9-year-old Tamsin, was found dead in the bath early yesterday morning.
She was the youngest of the family, born after, approximately probably around about 6-7 year gap between them. So she was very much loved by the older 3 children. And just a very, very happy, generous, kind girl. And she grew up in a household that, we gave her all the love and affection. She just totally contented. And, just a tragic happening. We're just utterly shattered to find her, the way she was, just, passed away.
Do you know what happened?
No, we're waiting on the coroner's report and autopsy, which hasn't been completed and won't be completed for a day or two.
Did she have any pre-existing medical conditions, anything that you know about?
No.
So this is just not only absolutely heartbreakingly tragic, but completely inexplicable.
Yes, it's it's just to us, it's utterly shattering. We're just my appeal to parents is to not take the children for granted, to make sure every moment counts, because our Angel was taken away in moments from us. We're part of a large support in our community. that's been reported on the news, obviously. And, you know, we've got a lot of Christian people. A lot of people come through our house, friends, and come through and done everything from washing, you know, just business chores, just everything, just whirled into action overnight. You know, so I just can't say anything more highly than all those that have just come to my aid. Our aid as a family, we needed it most. It's really just been the reason that we're even able to probably talk on this and talk about it right now. You know, even though we haven't got closure of even getting our daughter's body back. You know, we're just thankful that we're a part of such a giving, loving community that we're in anyway.
That's Patrick Whiteman, the father of the 9-year-old Tamsin, his much-loved youngest daughter who drowned in the family's bath yesterday morning. Most inexplicably, it is 5:30. You are with Checkpoint on RNZ. Coming up on the programme, National's immigration U-turn. Te Puia Marae opened its doors last week and is already full. It is doing things a little differently though this year. We will go there shortly, and US authorities vow to crack down on people smuggling after 8 people were found dead in a truck parked at a Walmart. But first, before all of that, Katrina Batten with RNZ Headlines.
A state of emergency remains in place in Christchurch as high tide threatens further flooding around the Heathcote River. About 60 properties have already been inundated, and the Canterbury Medical Officer of Health is advising homeowners in the affected area to leave as soon as possible and to stay away. Locals are also being warned to treat all water as contaminated. The state of emergency in Otago has been lifted, but the Regional Council says the repair bill from the floods will be substantial. The Council's chair says the full picture is still not clear, but there's significant damage to roads. Some bridges have been wiped out and there are numerous slips across the region. Texan police have arrested a 60-year-old truck driver after the death of 9 people in what immigration officials say is people smuggling operation gone badly wrong. About 100 people are thought to have been locked in the back of a truck in the city of San Antonio in sweltering heat without water or air conditioning. Auckland principals say managers are working in the classroom at some schools because of a shortage of young teachers due to the city's high cost of housing. Principals say some schools have given up advertising vacancies because of a lack of response, and they're worried about finding teachers for next year. Fruit and vegetable growers are welcoming the government's move to back off its proposed tougher line on migrant workers. The government was looking at introducing minimum incomes for some jobs and forcing migrants to leave for at least 12 months after 3 years of working in this country. But the Prime Minister has said it will take another look at the moves after complaints the changes would make it harder for fast-growing sectors to find workers. Those are the headlines. I'm back at 6 o'clock.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. We are at Te Puia next, but let's turn to business news first with Giles Beckford and The Warehouse. Hi, Giles, beaming in from Wellington, our business editor. And The Warehouse is getting rid of a problem child. It's selling its consumer finance arm.
Good evening to you, John. Yes, it has. It's been barely 18 months since Warehouse took control of the finance arm. It bought out Westpac in mid-2015, and it's a firm that offered the hire purchase agreements, consumer insurance, credit cards, that sort of thing. It's pretty standard. Fisher & Paykel had a long-running and very profitable consumer finance operation. But it's been bleeding money almost from day one. By my tally, in the 18 months or so, it's owned it. The group has lost somewhere around $11 million in operating costs, and it has written off close to $50 million in IT systems, goodwill and the like. So it's been a millstone around the company's neck, especially at a time when the red sheds have been under pressure. It's been struggling to get a real foothold on the online market. And from that point of view, it was a distraction it didn't need. So it's cleaned it up off the balance sheet. It sold it to a subsidiary of the SBS Bank, the old Southland Building Society. The company's called Finance Now. It's gone for $18 million. The warning is that there will be another hit of $16 million as it writes down the value in the accounts coming up in a month or two. One thing is that the company's still sticking by its expectation that its broad profit for this current year will be somewhere in the region of $54 to $58 million, but certainly one that the warehouse will be pleased to see the back of. It never got a bargain on that one.
No, how did the market respond to this, Charles?
It wasn't too bad, actually. They saw it as a positive move. The share price was up 5 cents. Okay. That's a couple of percent. I might say that just from my casual observation, I wonder whether the stock exchange might take a close look at some of the recent share trading in the warehouse, and that it'd been falling rather dramatically, almost 21% so far this year. But in the past week, it just managed to edge up 8%. And they are, of course, always vigilant about such things.
Yeah, that's curious. The NBR Rich List, the annual Rich List out today, Giles.
We didn't make it. No. And I can sense your disappointment from here, John. I know you only got in last year because I stuck your photo over somebody's entry. Yeah. And we've got complaints of misleading advertising on that one as well. The theme of this year's Rich List is that the rich have got richer, which is a surprise, apparently. But, of course, they've done it. A lot of it, of course, is property, and it's gone up in property valuations, or if they own shares, then it's been the rise in the share market, which is up somewhere in the region of 12% so far this year. There are some new entrants there, people who clearly always had the wealth, but it just was a little bit below the radar. One of those, a very pleasant man, Bruce Lindsay, who was in charge of, or who owned the Systema plastic packaging company, which he sold for $650 million earlier this year. So he ends up there. No surprise, Graham Hart is at the top of the list. He's had to struggle with only adding $500 million extra to his $6 billion or whatever it is. And the instant New Zealand citizen, Peter Thiel, comes in at number 2 with around $3.5 billion. Tally it all up, there are 208 people on the list, or family groups on the list. They collectively have around $80 billion. That's just under a third of the country's gross domestic product. Wow. And I might say that not everybody has welcomed the appearance of the Rich List. One Auckland University academic, Ronald Kramer, is quoted as saying that it encourages people to value wealthy people and wealth at the expense of social considerations. In his words, it's ideological, comes out in publications owned by wealthy people, produced for mass consumption, but targeted at relatively wealthy consumers. And I have to say that coming from a publicly owned broadcaster, no one can accuse us of that.
No. Giles, what did the markets do today?
The share market just up modestly, up 11 points for the top 50 at 7682. The New Zealand dollar sitting around 74.3 US cents and 93.7 Australian.
Giles Beckford, our business editor, thank you. Let's head from the Rich List to Te Puia Marae near the airport in Auckland, of course, Mangere, where once again they're taking in the homeless over winter. Last winter they were flooded with families. A kind of subsistence operation began. Public donations, makeshift accommodation running to keep up, really. A year on, they opened their doors last week to an initial 25 family members, parents and children, and that's already full. But this winter they'll stop there for the time being. They'll ensure those people have the support they need, work with the government to make sure their benefit entitlements are being met, sort schooling and health needs, then work to arrange permanent accommodation before taking in the next 25. While the demand hasn't stopped, Te Puia chairman Huri Moana Dennis told me this winter their response is a more targeted one.
We've had families coming to the marae ever since we closed our door last September, but obviously hasn't been as much. So it hasn't abated, if that's the word.
In short, the demand hasn't stopped. 56 families last winter, a steady stream of families over summer, and now the doors are open again. The marae is full almost immediately. Smaller numbers this winter, though, 25 at a time, with a view to getting families up and running and into more permanent accommodation before taking the next group in. And that speaks of another difference too. Last year, Te Puia caught the government out as homelessness became the story of the winter. A Mangere marae's ability to meaningfully respond made the government look flat-footed. This year, it's a joint effort. Social agencies are working closely with the marae.
I'm not too sure how to put this, John, but there's just a lot more energy, a lot more empathy, a lot more urgency around, hey, come on, we need to get some stuff going. John, and that's a big point of difference for us this year, and I just wanted to make note of that.
The need remains, though, although the families that have come to Tapuia since its doors opened last week have come from emergency accommodation, not cars. The taxpayer-funded motels and lodges that are a very expensive kind of limbo, not homelessness, but costly, temporary, and often with inadequate facilities. Shelter, yes, but not a home.
They need a home, John, without a doubt, but they are grateful that not only are they getting a place to stay with us at Te Puia, but they just need to open the door, and the support services, agencies or NGOs or social services are right there for them. So we're still working with them, and we'll be working with them for some time, but it's all just outside the front door, which is the point of difference. And it means, John, we can give them good news at 9 o'clock at night. We put them to bed, we wake them up, we can have intimate conversations, we eat together, and that's our point of difference.
Hirimwana, you say you can give them good news at 9 o'clock at night. What do you mean by that?
Well, John, it could mean that they have a tidy budget, their benefits have been updated, they're on the right benefits, say. Agencies, support agencies who are working with our marae social services have committed to helping them through their care plan, whatever resources they need, John.
So a year on, Tapuia is working with social agencies to provide a kind of wraparound service. And as for the families they took in last year, shocking the nation as they arrived in the cars and vans they'd been sleeping in, what's happened to them?
Well, John, can I give you this example? I was sitting at Burger King about 3 months ago, not eating burgers, of course, but looking... sitting there waiting for our order, and I picked up a community, the local rag, and on the front page, John, was a photo of one of our whānau from last year, Mum and Dad and 5. And John, they had won the Auckland Council recycling competition, John. So they were put up there as an exemplar family of here's how you do your plastics and your waste. I was over the moon. So I rang the mum. I said, gee, well, what's that all about? Because, oh, look, it's a big deal. We won the competition. And they're still in their house, John. Mum and Dad have a job. The kids are warm back at school. One of the kids has got scholarships. John, that's what I'm talking about with an outcome, John. And I used the award, the Council Recycling Award, as an example of how these families have really replugged themselves into the community. And that has to be the best example you can give.
A sense of possibility and a sense of pride.
Absolutely, and a big competition too. And John, I suppose what I'm saying is the fact that they have a home, everything's settled, now their focus is, okay, which plastics go where? I mean, that has to be an outcome, John, because prior to that, John, they were in their van, Mum and Dad and 5, for about 3 and 4 months.
Hirimwana Dennis, the chairman of Tapuia. Industries reliant on migrant workers are happy the government is backing off changes to skilled migrant visas, but now they'd like to see a system that's more responsive to regional demands. In April, it announced changes aimed at restricting immigration numbers. That include a minimum median annual income of $48,000 for jobs currently considered skilled, and forcing migrants to leave for at least 12 months after 3 years of working here. What's happening now? Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The new immigration rules were due to come into effect on the 14th of August. However, following complaints from businesses and some in the regions, the Prime Minister Bill English says they'll take another look at the proposals for skilled migrant visas.
We've had some feedback from people who are in an economy that's creating 10,000 jobs a month, who are telling us that some of those parameters are a bit tight.
Labour's immigration spokesperson Ian Lees-Galloway says there were major flaws in the original proposal.
I think it's a back down from the government that came out with this policy, I think, as a knee-jerk reaction to the concerns that people were raising about immigration, which they had ignored for far too long. I don't think this policy was very well thought through.
The New Zealand First leader Winston Peters says it's a shambles.
First of all, they're attacking areas of the country where there's not a problem at all and totally ignoring the problems that are based around Auckland and the huge infrastructural demand, and also the massive number that came in, 22,000 plus, without any skills at all in the last 12 months.
Mike Chapman is the Chief Executive of Horticulture New Zealand. He says the changes would not have affected seasonal workers in the industry, but it would have been a different story for permanent employees.
If we can't find Kiwis, we then have to look to immigrants, and we look to immigrants with skills. The 48,000 a year is very close to what we pay many of our skilled workers, and certainly they can build up to it. But that would have been an impediment to our continued growth if the 48,000 had stayed in place, also the 1 year stand down.
Mike Chapman would like to see much more flexibility in the immigration system.
And allows consideration on a case-by-case and a province-by-province basis is a very good idea, because if there is low unemployment in the area and you can't find Kiwis, that's an area that needs assistance.
The head of Federated Farmers Dairy, Chris Lewis, says their greatest concern was the requirement for migrant workers who had been in the country for 3 years to leave for 12 months. He says after 3 years, staff are settling in and starting to take on more responsibility.
They can join the ranks of being middle management on dairy farms, and that'll be a great outcome. And we don't want to export all their experience and all that training we've done to another country. It'll cost the industry a lot of money.
And he disagrees with the view New Zealanders are lazy and don't want to work.
No, all the good hard-working Kiwis are already in jobs, and especially in some of the towns around the Waikato, unemployment rate's pretty low as it is. And so a lot of them now on the unemployment benefit are between jobs or getting retrained.
Labour's Ian Lees-Galloway says awarding skilled migrant visas using income thresholds isn't the way to go, and Labour won't do that if it forms the next government. He says his party's policy of approving skilled migrant visas in the regions that really need extra workers, as identified by councils, unions and businesses, would help address skills shortages without needlessly boosting immigration numbers. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Jane Patterson.
Auckland school principals fear they won't be able to find enough teachers for next school year. They say managers are already doubling as classroom teachers at schools that have given up trying to fill vacancies, and others are using part-timers to fill full-time roles. Meanwhile, a survey shows many young teachers want to leave the city because they simply can't afford to live in Auckland. Our education correspondent John Gerritsen reports.
Adam Tamariki started teaching 3 years ago and loves his job in Manurewa. But he recently got married, and that's spurring him to look for a job outside Auckland so he and his partner can afford to buy a house and stop living with flatmates.
We were thinking definitely towards the end of the year, if not sooner, just because we really want our own space and just really want to have a bit more of a future just by ourselves. So, yeah, there's definitely lots of jobs out there. The rent seems to be cheaper elsewhere as well.
A survey by the Educational Institute indicates a lot of young teachers have similar plans. 260 of the 450 respondents are thinking of leaving Auckland, and 57 are actively planning to go. Adam Tamariki says it's not just young teachers who want to leave.
It's pretty sad because, they're losing the quality teachers as well, not just new teachers, but teachers that have been in the profession for a long time. So it puts pressure on the schools because the quality for the students is dropping as well. And especially for new teachers, we think it's a career that we want to strive in and stuff, but things like housing and things are taking that away from us.
The NZEI's Auckland spokesperson Malcolm Milner says the loss of teachers to other centres is making it harder than ever to find staff.
I've been a principal for 20 years and I think this is the worst I've ever seen it. This is a real drought. For our school, which is a fairly large central Auckland school, it started 3 years ago. We lost 5 teachers in 1 year to Tauranga. We've seen over that course of that 3 years the number of applicants getting smaller and smaller and smaller.
Malcolm Milner says schools are doing what they can to put teachers in front of children, but he worries the time will come when some simply cannot find anyone.
The job that we advertised last term, we couldn't find a full-time teacher to pick up that, so we went for 2 part-time teachers, job sharing. So you're starting to see that happen now. We want teachers in front of children and we'll try and make it work, but I think sooner or later it will come to a situation where there is no teacher in front of that class.
The president of the Auckland Primary Principals Association, Kevin Bush, says some schools have given up advertising vacancies because of a lack of responses, and they're starting to worry about next year.
There's a lot of anxiety. A lot of schools are struggling. I know one school that had 3 positions and they just gave up advertising in the end and thought, right, we're going to put our senior leadership team back in the classroom. It's not a good situation.
Kevin Bush says house prices, commuting times and the hard work involved with teaching are contributing to the shortage. The Education Ministry says teacher retention in the city is generally high at more than 92%. It says the government is spending $9 million to help ensure there are enough teachers in Auckland. For Checkpoint, John Gerritsen.
A ninth person has died after what immigration officials in the US state of Texas said was a people smuggling operation gone horribly wrong. About 100 people are thought to have been locked in the back of a truck in the city of San Antonio in sweltering heat without water or air conditioning. Texas Public Radio's Joey Palacios reports.
The trailer was found in a Walmart parking lot. Inside were nearly 40 people. A store worker called police after a person from the trailer approached him asking for water.
So we're just shocked at what we believe is heartless human smuggling.
That's San Antonio's District 4 Councilman Ray Saldana. He was called to the parking lot at 2:30 in the morning.
As soon as I arrived on scene, what we saw were 8 yellow body bags on the ground, and what the chief was describing was that there was over 24 individuals still who were in critical condition.
The driver was arrested. He faces federal and state charges. The 30 survivors were taken to hospitals around San Antonio. Over half had life-threatening injuries. Here's Fire Chief Charles Hood.
Each one of them had heart rates over about 130 beats per minute, which they were very hot to the touch. So these people were in that trailer without any signs of any type of water, so you're looking at a lot of a heat stroke, a lot of dehydration.
At midnight Sunday, the city's temperature was 85 degrees. In just a normal vehicle with no AC, that temperature can rise 35 degrees in less than 30 minutes. San Antonio is no stranger to human trafficking. Interstates 35 and 10 often serve as trafficking routes. San Antonio Mayor Ron Nierenberg said the city would provide help in connecting the victims with families.
That report from Texas Public Radio. President Donald Trump's new communications director has described the leaks coming from the White House as un-American and is warning that staff who leak will be fired. Anthony Scaramucci, a career Wall Street financier and longtime friend of President Trump, was appointed during the weekend to the administration's top messaging job. But our correspondent in Washington, Simon Marks, says he's not sure Mr. Scaramucci will be able to achieve the reset he desires.
6 months into the Trump presidency, and suddenly a new sheriff rode into town. Anthony Scaramucci looks every inch a Donald Trump clone. If you didn't know he was a successful Wall Street financier, you might think he ran a car dealership in New Jersey. Slicked back hair, tight-fitting suit, easy sales patter. He told reporters not once but 3 times that he loves Donald Trump.
I think he's got some of the best political instincts in the world and perhaps in history, and he's done a phenomenal job for the American people. And the people I grew up with, they so identify with the president and they love him, and so we're going to get that message out.
Of course, he hasn't always waxed that lyrical about America's 45th president. Here's the same Anthony Scaramucci making an appearance on Fox News back in the days when he was supporting another Republican for the presidency, Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin.
You call Donald Trump a hack?
He's a hack politician. It's anti-American. It's very, very divisive.
You think Donald's a plant?
And I'll tell you who he's going to be president of. You can tell Donald I said this. The Queens County Bullies Association. You got to cut it out now and stop all this crazy rhetoric.
But that was then. This is now. And just in case there were any lingering doubts about where Mr. Scaramucci stands, he seems to have spent a few hours on Friday scrubbing his Twitter account, deleting critical references to the president. His appointment caused uproar behind the scenes in the West Wing. Many of the president's top aides don't trust him, don't like him, and don't want him there. They include Sean Spicer, who immediately resigned his post as White House press secretary after what was described as a vehement conversation with the president.
Sean felt like it would be best for that team to be able to start with a totally clean slate.
By lunchtime, Sarah Huckabee Sanders, the deputy press secretary, had been promoted and given Mr. Spicer's job. They are peas in a pod. Both of them have shown an historically unprecedented willingness to lie repeatedly on behalf of the president and undo decades of transparency and public accountability in Washington. Sean Spicer made it almost performance art in his hapless appearances behind the White House podium.
There's been a lot of talk in the media about the responsibility to hold Donald Trump accountable.
and I'm here to tell you that it goes two ways.
So much so that he was lampooned on the comedy show Saturday Night Live by actress Melissa McCarthy. The president seems to think Anthony Scaramucci can improve the way in which the White House communicates its message to the wider public. But unless he's got the authority to silence the president's very loud Twitter account, like Sean Spicer before him, it may not be long before he's firmly on the back foot.
Simon Marks reporting from Washington. Home again. Officials have no idea how many private rental properties still need insulation 2 years before it becomes compulsory. The government has made much of the Healthy Homes program, which has insulated 300,000 mostly owner-occupied houses since 2009. However, uptake of a government grant for properties rented to low-income tenants has been sluggish, and officials say they have no record or estimate of how many private rentals have been insulated. As part of RNZ's election series, Is This the Brighter Future? Kate Newton reports on whether conditions are improving for the growing number of renters as home ownership becomes increasingly out of reach.
David Flyger reckons his current landlord is the best he's had in 8 years of flatting in Auckland. But the high school teacher's downstairs bedroom is still extremely damp in winter, with only ceiling insulation installed so far.
When you wake up in the morning, there's condensation everywhere, and at night there's condensation everywhere, and you try to both run heating but also open windows to keep air flowing. It's a constant battle to keep things clean and as healthy as you can. I don't want to sound like an egg, but when you got a proper job, I've been working as a teacher for 8 years, and you're still battling to stay warm, it's kind of a bit depressing when you're in your 30s.
Mr Flyger is part of a well-documented rise in the number of New Zealanders still renting well into their 30s and 40s as house prices climb beyond their reach. Since National was elected in 2008, the number of bonds held by tenancy services, which is one way of counting the number of households that are renting, has increased by a third to 390,000. The government has resisted calls from tenant advocacy groups for a rental warrant of fitness. But 2 years ago, it announced that all rental properties would need to have ceiling and underfloor insulation installed by July 2019, or landlords would face a $4,000 fine. It estimated then that there were still 180,000 such houses that could be insulated but hadn't been. Stu Harwood and his wife Jenna Todd have rented a brick and tile house in Auckland's Mount Roskill for the last 3 years. Their first winter in the house was so cold they took to sleeping next to the fire in the living room.
When the government announced that it was going to put in mandatory insulation requirements, that day I emailed our landlord and said, hey, look, it's really cold in the flat and you're going to need to insulate this place. Eventually, can you please insulate it really soon because we're freezing?
Stu was pleasantly surprised when his landlord turned up that week to put in ceiling insulation.
It did seem to make an improvement. And then the next year, they insulated underneath the floor. It's still a cold house, that's single pane windows and, it's quite sort of drafty and stuff. But it definitely does hold the heat in a lot better.
While Mr Harwood's landlord was proactive, the Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment says it has no updated estimate of how many of those 180,000 private rentals still lack proper insulation. Otago University public health researcher Lucy Telfer-Barnard says it's not good enough that the ministry hasn't kept track of that.
It's important that we know because we need to know whether our housing quality is getting better. We know that it's bad and we need to know whether the things that we've been doing to try and improve the insulation levels in homes have been making a difference.
The ministry says insulation will be an area of focus for its investigations team after the July 2019 deadline. Dr Telfer-Barnard says it's going to be very difficult for the ministry to enforce the new laws without proper records.
They've got 15 people, I think, in their enforcement team at the moment for the whole country. And as it stands, the follow-up on that relies otherwise on the tenant to enforce the lack of insulation if there is any. So unless they get a complaint to the tenancy tribunal, nothing happens to the landlord. And lots of tenants would rather avoid the tenancy tribunal.
As for Stu Harwood, he's lost track of the number of times he's had to move in his 17 years as a renter. He says he's tired of the instability and the feeling his life is on hold.
There's very little incentive to run a garden properly, there's no way we could own a dog, probably in Auckland, let alone having a child. I'd be so terrified of what a landlord would think if we had a toddler running around the house.
Stu Harwood ending that report from Kate Newton. Let's go to the UK, where a documentary is about to go to air, where Prince William and Prince Harry talk about their mum on the 20th anniversary of her death. This from the BBC's Greg Dawson.
Nearly 20 years on from her death, Prince William, now a parent himself, talks of reminding his children of the grandmother they never met.
We've got more photos up around the house now of her, and we talk about her a bit and stuff. And it's hard because obviously Catherine didn't know her, so she cannot really provide that level of detail. So I do regularly, putting George or Charlotte to bed, talk about her and just try and remind her that there are two grandmothers. There were two grandmothers in their lives.
Prince Harry was a boy of just 12 when he lost his mother. In a conversation with one of her friends, Sir Elton John, they reflect on her compassion, particularly her work with HIV charities.
Everybody in that photograph is smiling.
Because of her.
Yeah.
I mean, she had an energy. Look at her face in every photograph. There's a positive, wonderful glow. Also, she had this incredible ability, which he's kind of inherited, and I told him that, and he said, thanks very much, to make people feel at ease and make them feel that everything's going to be all right.
Much has been said and written about Diana in the years since her death, but for this anniversary, it is her sons who are keen to remind people of her impact on their lives and the world.
That report from the BBC. After 6, we're going live to Christchurch.
RNZ News at 6. Ngā mihi nui, good evening, ko Katrina Batanaho. People living along Christchurch's Heathcote River are waiting to see if tonight's high tide will flood more homes. The water is expected to reach its peak in half an hour. The authorities say about 60 properties have already been flooded. 30 of the houses were flooded above floor level with river water contaminated with raw sewage. The Canterbury Medical Officer of Health is advising anyone still living in those homes to leave as soon as possible and to stay away. Civil Defence response teams with building inspectors and welfare officers have been visiting residents still living in badly affected properties this afternoon to assess their needs. Meanwhile, the Christchurch City Council is defending its flood protection works. Some residents are demanding answers over why they continue to be hit with flooding. The council's drainage manager, Keith Davidson, says it spent $25 million on flood protection works in and around the Heathcote River and will spend a further $52 million before next winter.
There's always a bigger storm that could come. There's always a bigger tidal surge. So what we have to do is we have to try and predict for, the events that would happen in a sort of generational event. And that's what we're working very, very hard to achieve. So we can't give guarantees, but what we have seen is that, particularly since 2014, we have done a lot of work which has reduced flood risk.
Keith Davidson. South in Dunedin, the City Council is warning people not to try to return to the flooded settlement of Henley until all the water goes. 35 homes in the settlement on the bank of the Tairi River were evacuated on Friday night when the river rose to its second highest level on record. The council's flood recovery manager, Simon Pickford, says it's not yet safe.
We did a flyover yesterday, and Henley looked very badly affected, and that's why people haven't been able to go back. But some people were obviously there, and we did see a few people. But we're really encouraging people to avoid that floodwater because there is that significant health risk.
Simon Pickford says it could take a few days until Henley residents can return. An American doctor fears immigration red tape may force him to be kicked out of the country despite the desperate need for GPs in rural areas. Dr Mitch Feller has worked in Taranaki for 3.5 years and made a mistake on his residency application, meaning he needed to renew his work permit. The 67-year-old says he's been met with requests for a barrage of new health tests, which he may not be able to meet in time.
I feel that it's been adversarial. I don't feel that they have a good grip on the shortage of doctors that we're struggling with.
Dr Feller says he and his wife sold up everything in the United States and had intended to settle in New Zealand. Immigration New Zealand says GPs are included on its long-term skills shortage list, but applicants have to meet the relevant immigration criteria. The dairy and pip food industries are welcoming a review of planned immigration policies they say would have stifled growth. The government is to take another look at the proposed changes to skilled migrant visas. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The changes were aimed at restricting immigration numbers. They included a minimum median annual income of $48,000 for jobs currently considered skilled and forcing migrants to leave for at least 12 months after 3 years of working in the country. Horticulture New Zealand and Federated Farmers say while they try to hire New Zealanders first, they do sometimes rely on migrant labour. They say the proposals would have made it harder to secure experienced long-term staff. They'd also like a more flexible system to recognise the different demands in different regions. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
A suicide attacker has detonated a car bomb in the western part of Afghanistan's capital, Kabul, killing at least 24 people and wounding 42. Police have cordoned off the area located near the house of the Deputy Government Chief Executive. The target of the attack is so far unclear. The acting Interior Ministry spokesman says the casualty toll could rise further. More than 1,600 civilians have been killed in Afghanistan during the past 6 months. The UK Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson has unveiled a striking war memorial in Wellington as a gift from Britain. Mr Johnston, who's on a 2-day visit to New Zealand, presented the statue at the Pukeahu National War Memorial Park this afternoon. The statue, designed by Weta Workshop, features an oak and pahutakawa tree intertwining with a stained glass canopy. Mr Johnson says it's a symbol of the two countries' enduring friendship.
The world is still full of threats, and I'm afraid that New Zealand and Britain are going to have to continue to stand shoulder to shoulder, and we will.
Boris Johnson also paid tribute to the New Zealanders who died in the First World War. It's 6:05. In sport, the American golfer Matt Kuchar says he's crushed after missing out on the British Open to compatriot Jordan Spieth at Royal Birkdale in Liverpool. The 39-year-old, who's never won a major, played consistently throughout the tournament and had the lead with 5 holes to play, only for Spieth to enjoy a sensational finish and win by 3 shots.
It's crushing, it hurts, and there's an excitement and a thrill to have played well. You work so hard to get to this position and to have a chance to make history and to win a championship. You don't get that many opportunities. To be this close, to taste it with 5 holes to go, it's a hard one to sit back and take.
Matt Kuchar. Meanwhile, the disappointing form by New Zealand's Lydia Ko has continued, with her finishing tied for 20th at the latest LPGA event in Ohio. Booed by the locals in Marseille 24 hours earlier, Chris Froome charmed huge crowds in Paris with his victory speech after claiming his toughest Tour de France title. The British rider has won his 4th Tour title, becoming just the 7th rider to win the event without a stage victory.
I'm speechless. I mean, it's just amazing feeling. The Champs-Élysées never disappoints. Yeah, it's just something magical about it when you've spent 3 weeks thinking about being here in this moment. It is so rewarding every time.
Tour de France winner Chris Froome. That's the news.
This week on Nights, Miriam Wilkes-Hague tells the story of Eileen Fowler, the mother of the modern women's slimming movement, the conductor Hamish McKeach, one of the stars of the New Zealand Ballet's production of Romeo and Juliet, not that you'll see him on stage, and Sarah Peverley on the Mere movement, why a growing number of people are identifying as mermaids. On Nights this week with me, Brian Crump, from Afternoon News at 7 on RNZ National.
Met service weather through to midnight tomorrow, Northland to Taranaki, including Coromandel, Taupo, Taumaranui and Taihape. A few showers becoming frequent for a time overnight and tomorrow morning with isolated thunderstorms. Bay of Plenty, cloudy periods, showers tomorrow with possible thunderstorms clearing in the afternoon. Gisborne to Wairarapa, mainly fine, isolated showers tomorrow. Whanganui to Kapiti Coast, a few showers, turning to rain this evening, clearing and becoming fine tomorrow morning. Wellington, Marlborough, Canterbury and Otago, areas of cloud and isolated showers, clearing tomorrow morning. Nelson, showers, clearing and becoming fine this evening. Bulla and Westland, showers easing this evening. Southland, a few showers, clearing this evening but returning tomorrow morning. Fiordland, a few showers, turning to rain tonight, and the Chatham Islands, mostly cloudy, drizzle at times tomorrow. It's 6:08 and you're listening to Checkpoint.
Thank you very much indeed, Katrina. Let's head to Christchurch now, where people living along the Heathcote River are bracing for possible further flooding at high tide. The tide is expected to push more water out of the river into the areas most severely flooded over the weekend. At least that was expected. We don't think it's happening. Let's go live to Christchurch Civil Defence Controller Mary Richardson. Mary, are you there?
Yes, hello. Hi, John.
Hi, nice to talk to you. So high tide would push water up the Heathcote, but it's staying inside the riverbanks, we understand?
Yes, so we're not expecting the high peak levels to be in the Heathcote till about 6:30, but all indications are that actually it's not going to be as high as expected, so it probably will be around what it was on Sunday or lower.
That's good news, isn't it? So there won't be further flooding in those properties?
There could be some areas some houses that have been flooded before could see the water level just rise up again to previous levels, but there won't be any. We're not expecting any new flooding.
Gosh, okay. Gosh, there was a lot of water in that city over the weekend, wasn't there?
Yes, yeah, look, and it wasn't what was expected. So we had that sort of accumulated rainfall and then that storm surge,
yes,
which really sort of pushed the levels up.
Right, the state of emergency remaining in place until tomorrow morning, but there is an expectation it will be lifted then?
We're reassessing tomorrow morning based on what happens in that peak water level this afternoon or later this evening, and then we'll be reassessing what the patterns are. So we've got people modelling all the time about the tide levels, the air pressure and rainfall. So we've still got this pattern of high tide levels. So tonight's tide was actually the highest in the tide cycle for this current period. So we just have to monitor that against the rainfall and the air pressure, which causes storm surges.
Okay, so the tide is high and there is the potential for some recurrence of flooding in some of those properties along the Heathcote. What about the sewage issues? Has that problem stopped? Because, of course, the drains was simply struggling. They couldn't cope with the water levels. Are you still getting sewage turning up above the ground?
Yep, no, all that's all been resolved. So we are really seeing water levels, the catchments in the hills are starting to drop, and so therefore the sort of flowing out to the river, and also our sort of the sewage system is working and having no trouble with fresh water or sewage.
Okay, that's good news. And just to conclude, so reassessing the state of emergency, reconsidering that tomorrow morning?
Yes, yeah. So we're deciding whether we move into recovery phase or whether we just need to keep the declaration on for potentially another few hours or day.
Mary Richardson, who is Christchurch Civil Defence Controller. Thanks so much, Mary, joining us live there as they keep an eye on the Heathcote River. Local councils reeling from the effects of devastating storms want the government to step in and help pay for flood protection. Now, this follows the weekend's deluge of rain, which caused widespread disruption on the South Island's east coast between Christchurch and Dunedin, and of course in both cities. Our local government reporter Michael Kropp spoke with mayors and councillors about the broader problem.
Last month, the Auditor-General put councils on notice that they weren't spending enough to maintain and replace their ageing roads, water and sewerage. The Dunedin Mayor, Dave Cull, whose region was hard hit by the weekend's heavy rains, says his city's about $50 million behind on infrastructure spending and is now having to play catch-up. But some councils argue they can't afford it. Waikato Regional Councillor Dal Minogue says their flood protection schemes are now too expensive to maintain.
The local community cannot afford to continue funding these flood schemes as they're being recapitalised. The costs are greater than they were in the old days, and there are new standards with the Resource Management Act, consents and all that sort of thing.
Mr Minogue, like other councillors around the country, wants the government to stump up some of the cash.
Because state highways run through these flood-prone areas, they can't exist without the flood protection schemes. The public want to have streams accessible for fish, so that would mean an upgrading of the flood schemes themselves. So there's good arguments for why a degree of regional funding and government funding should go into these things.
In Hawke's Bay, Regional Councillor Fenton Wilson says every dollar invested in flood protection returns 130 in benefits. Horizons Regional Council includes flood-prone Manawatu, Whanganui and Horowhenua. Councillor Gordon McCallum says with climate change changing the weather for the worse and the community reaching the limits of what it can afford, the government must step in.
Those local communities are struggling to afford the ongoing cost of maintaining them, and also we've got challenges with changing climate and weather systems. We need to actually increase our resilience, so we would like some contribution from the government, in a long-term funding model to help those communities to pay for those schemes.
Rachel Rees, Nelson's mayor, says the problem of affordability extends to all major council infrastructure.
If we want to have livable cities, if we want to be a country that is going to attract the best and the brightest from around the world, it's going to keep the best and brightest in New Zealand, then we have got to invest in the critical infrastructure that makes cities livable, keeps communities healthy, that keeps our environment healthy. And right now, I think we're at the edge of being able to do that with the current funding model.
Local government New Zealand reiterated councils need new options to fund the upgrade of their ageing infrastructure, something that only government can fix. In Auckland for Checkpoint, Carmichael Cropperho.
Let's go to Wellington, where initial tests on an aquifer in the city's harbour are showing promising signs of it being able to supply water to parts of the capital that could be without water for prolonged periods after a major earthquake, should one happen. This is a world-first operation to drill for fresh water, and while the project is in its early stages, it raises hopes that the aquifer will be able to provide water to vulnerable areas. There are fears that if Wellington's main water pipelines fail in a major earthquake, southern and eastern suburbs of the city could have water cut off for weeks, up to even 100 days. Our science reporter Jacob McSweeney went out and visited the bore.
About 750 metres off the Miramar Peninsula in the middle of Wellington's harbour, the drill barge sits. And as Wellington Water Chief Executive Colin Crampton explains, last week the drill team found exactly what they were looking for: physical proof the Waifetu aquifer extended to the entrance of the harbour.
The drill rig has just reached the top of the aquifer, about 50 metres from the platform, from the top of the platform here. We have encountered fresh water in the top of the aquifer, so that's very promising.
But it's still early days before the city can come to rely on the harbour entry as an access point to water in the event a major earthquake cuts the pipes currently feeding the capital. The first drilling attempts started about 2 weeks ago, but only reached 15 metres below the sea floor before the barge and drilling rig had to be brought back to port ahead of a storm. Now it has resumed, Colin Crampton says they will continue drilling for a further 30 metres to confirm previous geological models of the aquifer and send samples away for testing.
And if that's all good, then we'll move to the next critical stage, which is then to drill further holes to test the quantity of water that we can extract from the aquifer to make it an alternative source. And that's really got to be done very carefully, because we're dealing with the Waifetu aquifer, which supplies Wellington City now from Waterloo, and so we've just got to check that we can get the water we're expecting out of it without impacting on the performance of the whole aquifer.
Colin Crampton says it costs about $2.5 million to do the exploratory drilling and test the water samples. He says if the drilling is a success and the harbour access to the aquifer can be relied on, it's half the price of a cross-harbour pipeline that was proposed. Macmillan Drilling is tasked with providing and operating the machinery. Its group manager Ian Haycock describes the drill.
It's a jack-up barge, so the barge is actually sitting on the sea floor at the moment in about 25 metres of water. So there's the spud legs, which you can see, there's 4 of them in each corner. They extend, well, they're 33 metres in length, and so they're extending from the current deck level down to sea floor.
He says a steel pole is used to contain the drilled hole and avoid any seawater or other contaminants getting into the aquifer.
And then we have a sea riser, which is a steel pipe that is connected to the barge, and that makes its way into the seabed and then beyond, and that allows us to run our drilling equipment in and out of the hole and preserve the integrity of the aquifer that we're looking to find, and prevent any risk of saltwater intrusion, which is one of the hazards we have.
Once the exploratory hole is complete, Wellington Water will pump water from the bore for 7 days to check the flow and quality of it. Drilling of this kind and scale has never been done before. There is one similar undersea water exploration project in the United States, but it is still in its planning stage. I te whanganui atara mo te otaka o te ahi, ko Jacob McSweeney, tēnei.
Fascinating story there. Kaikoura needs visitors, and today it received a very high-profile one in the form of Boris Johnson. The British Foreign Secretary is a politician about it, which can probably be fairly said. Opinions are polarised, but not in Kaikoura today. There, as Kawahi Napora of Whale Watch Kaikoura told us, they were universally delighted to see him.
We had Boris down at work today, so it was great to meet him.
Why was it great to meet him? You're just being polite, aren't you?
No, it was great to meet him. I think the most important one there is that the UK market, the visitor market to Kaikoura is very important. In fact, it's number one for our town. So it was great to see Boris. We were able to do a bit of marketing to him, so hopefully he can go back to the UK and just tell him how wonderful Kaikoura is going to be this summer.
And was there a UK press call with him? Were there people taking photos and all that kind of stuff?
Yes, pictures and TV crews are there. So he also met with a few other local tourism businesses. So there was a good bunch of us there having good yarn.
Right. So in terms of the Whale Watch business, other than New Zealanders, your biggest group of visitors are Brits, are they?
Yeah, they're very, very important for us. Going way back to our early days, United Kingdom, and also very important for the whole tourism industry in Kaikoura.
OK, and are they coming in now, or have you seen a real drop-off since the earthquake?
Well, definitely there's been a decline from all markets as a direct result of the earthquake, but those visitors are still coming. We even had quite a few of the British and Irish Lions supporters coming along, so they're still making the effort to come and visit Kaikoura, so it's good.
And are they able to go whale watching when they get there?
Yep. I mean, we are restricted in terms of our operating capability. We're still just one vessel here, but we've actually managed to be able to take them out and show them a whale at a time. It's been great.
Show them a whale at a time. So you can, if you can get to town, you can go and see the whales.
Oh, absolutely. Get out and see the whales. We can do the dolphins, the seals. I mean, all those products are still there.
Kawahi Napora of Whale Watch Kaikoura speaking to us earlier this afternoon. A Port Hills homeowner thought World War III had broken out in her front yard over the weekend after one team of election volunteers nailed their hoarding over one belonging to another candidate. While much of Christchurch was underwater, National List MP Nuk Kurako's team was putting up an election hoarding, but they arrived at one Ōpawa address and found Ruth Dyson's team had got there first. Believing they were the only ones to have permission from the homeowner, the national team proceeded to nail Nook's hoarding over Ruth's hoarding. A short time ago, Nuk Kurako admitted his team was maybe just a little bit overzealous.
Basically goes back to Friday night. An owner got really upset that a political sign had been put on their fence without being within the allocated time, the official time, which was 12 o'clock Friday night, which was for Saturday morning. So that owner actually, and I didn't even know about it until someone actually texted me and said, hey, do you realise that the Labor sign is already up at 7 o'clock in the evening, they're 5 hours early, and I just thought, okay. So I just sort of went back to the owner and said, is it still all right for me then to have a sign on the fence? Because there's already one up there, even though it's before the actual official time. And then the owner went back and said, yeah, go for it. And then the owner texted me back again and said, and by the way, we'll just take the sign down, and that's your mandate from me as the owner. So anyway, 12 o'clock comes. That night, my team were out. I mean, it was really cold in Christchurch early that Saturday morning. So by the time they got there, all they did was sort of think, well, we're not going to take it down because that's why, let's just put a sign over it, our sign over it. Tomorrow we'll come back and take it down as we got asked by the owner. So that's how the whole thing sort of came out. It's just unfortunate because, if it sort of happened again, I suppose I would have said to my guys, hey, let's just wait until the morning. The owner can take it down, and then we'll just sort of move on from there. But obviously that didn't happen.
Right, so these are volunteers, Nook?
Yeah.
Volunteers, and so...
I've got a hoardings team.
Yeah, haven't we all, Nook? Yeah. And so the Labor Party hoardings team put up, prematurely erected a hoarding of Ruth Dyson. Your team went in and went over the top of Ruth Dyson, so to speak.
Yeah, well, basically we got a message, a text from the owner saying take it down.
Ruth Dyson, take Ruth Dyson down.
Take the sign down, yeah.
Yeah.
So my guys just put my hoarding over Ruth Dyson's sign. And we're going to come back the next day and take it down and put it in the side of the shed where we're told to put it, and then let them come around and pick it up.
So that's National MP Nuk Korako. Now, Labour's Ruth Dyson is the MP for Port Hills. We asked her where her hoarding is now.
It's either up or it's going up again very soon.
Right, so but Nook was on top of you. He was on top of you for a while there, wasn't he?
Oh, no, his sign. Cut it out, the visuals on that. His sign.
So, you're right. I mean, it's national radio and it's dinner time too, so that's wrong on every level. But his sign was on top of your sign.
That's right. He put his sign on top of mine.
No, it was his hoardings team. He's just told us it was his overzealous hoardings team. Yeah,
good on him. That's good. And then, so we didn't think much of that. So we just moved his and put it beside our one, which is the agreement that we'd always had with the homeowner. That seemed fine. We just moved his off mine, beside mine. So two are on the fence, side by side, all good. And then next time someone drove past, ours had been taken down and biffed over the fence.
So you're not there at all any longer?
Well, it's probably up again by now.
Right.
I've contacted the homeowner who thought World War III had been declared on her fence.
Yes. But the homeowner, because there seems to be some suggestion the homeowner was bewildered by the whole thing, but there was permission for election hoardings to be on the fence.
Oh, absolutely, I had permission. I'd never put a hoarding board up on a fence without permission. That's ridiculous. So I've got permission in writing, and she has confirmed that today.
Right. Maybe this speaks of a really tight contest in the Port Hills electorate, Ruth.
Oh, I don't think so. I think it's a bit of stupidity, to be honest. I mean, 5 minutes drive away from where this hoarding board is, we had people who were evacuated from their homes because of floods. So, my priority's been actually looking after my constituents rather than responding to overzealous volunteers or just plain stupidity. It's pretty arrogant to put your billboard over top of someone else's. It's just a weird thing to do.
Ruth Dyson, who is the sitting MP in the electorate. We've been unable to reach the homeowner today. Last month, the government pulled out of the Ngāpuhi treaty settlement process, leaving it up to two opposing groups to sort it out. Now, the co-leader of the Te Kotitanga, Peter Tepini, had offered to stand aside to help progress the claim and challenged Te Horonuku's leadership to do the same. But Deputy Chairman Sunny Tau has rejected the challenge, leaving the future of the mandate up in the air. Our Māori Issues correspondent Mihinarangi Forbes reports.
Few saw it coming last month after the Prime Minister Bill English had just met with the two groups heading the Ngāpuhi settlement, Te Horonuku and Te Kotahitanga. The PM had then called them to a meeting in Auckland, as he had before, but the announcement that followed left the Kotahitanga co-leader Peter Tepini shocked.
That I feel betrayed. I personally feel betrayed because after being led down a path where we thought we would work hard with the Te Horonuku team, compromise and find a way forward, only to have at the 11th hour the rug pulled out from under our feet by the Prime Minister.
Following the meeting, Mr English released a media statement explaining the government had stepped away from the negotiations until Ngāpuhi's opposing groups could agree. But it seems there is no chance of unity. Following the challenge for all current leaders to step aside, Te Horonuku's Deputy Chairman Sunny Tau responded by saying Mr Tepini had finally realised Te Kotahitanga doesn't have a mandate and it's time for them to move aside. So what happened? In 2014, Ngāpuhi, the country's largest and poorest iwi, had its mandate handed to Te Horonuku. But other hapu called Te Kotahitanga disagreed and filed claims with the Waitangi Tribunal, which found Te Horonuku didn't represent enough of Ngāpuhi. The tribunal recommended the government assist Ngāpuhi to find a unified way forward. A working group, made up of members of both groups, was appointed, and under the guidance of the Crown representatives, they created a new structure, Marangamai. Peter Tepini says it was a good initiative, which went astray.
Te Kotahitanga initially agreed with it in principle and then agreed with it in full. Te Horonuku agreed with it initially, and then Sunny Tau came back onto Tūhoronoko and changed all of that. So when you asked me the question, where did it all go wrong? It's when Sunny Tau came back and started playing a leading role in Tūhoronoko again.
Raniera Sunny Tau is a significant figure in Ngāpuhi politics and was Tūhoronoku's chairman at the time the government signed over the mandate. Following that, Mr Tau made headlines when he was convicted and discharged for hunting kereru. He resigned his position on Tūhoronoku's board, but recently he's been put back as deputy chair. But he disputes he's as powerful as Pita Tipene makes out.
Oh, I wish I had that influence over the government. It would be great, and Ngāpuhi would be at settlement now. So, no, I don't take much store by that.
In documents provided under the Official Information Act, both Tūhoronoku and Te Kotahitanga agreed to accept Marangamai as a unified settlement structure. But Mr Tau disputes that.
The Marangamai report is a complete relitigation of the mandate that Ngāpuhi gave Tūhoronoku in 2014.
But your group attended those meetings and agreed to it?
No.
Mr Tau claims the Crown's representative moved ahead without permission.
The Crown led the rollout of that to iwi, and that is where we're furious about the interference that the Crown run in terms of getting that signed off.
The two opposing groups have been given till the end of September to sort out Ngāpuhi's representation and forge a unified approach. Mo te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei ko Mihi Ngarangi Forbes, ahau.
6:29. Just before we go tonight, some feedback on the doctor, the American doctor who is in Taranaki where his services are required but is leaving. Regarding the doctor, the current immigration rules should stand, but the minister can make a case for the doctors to stay if circumstances are proved to be exceptional. Also, this screams the case for training more Kiwi doctors and for funding medical courses for Kiwis seriously. And with regard to the deported GP, the process should have been a recommendation from the GP Association to the Minister of Health. Why is this minister invisible and critical decisions like these being left to the delegated discretion of an immigration official? On every front, this government continues to mismanage our immigration processes, says Jenny. Thank you for being with us. We'll be back tomorrow at 5.
RNZ headlines at 6:30. Residents near the Heathcote River in Christchurch are anxiously waiting as the high tide peaks about now, threatening further flooding. An American doctor fears immigration red tape surrounding his work permit may force him to leave Taranaki. And 9 people are dead and a 60-year-old truck driver faces charges after a tragic end to people trafficking operation in San Antonio, Texas. Our next news and weather is at 7.
Oil companies are doing the absolute minimum that they have to. I think it's really a matter of people have battened down the hatches.
When you left school, you went to the mines because it was big money, and your ambition was to get on the coal shoveling it. I suppose when you look at it now, it's laughable.
In the run-up to the election, the RNZ series, Is This the Brighter Future?, looks at the government's record through the eyes of